again, boys and girls. It's time to take a walk beyond the grassy knoll, to draw back the curtain to take a peek at the wizard. VYZYGOTH's Beyond the Grassy Knoll continues. VYZYGOTH's Beyond the Grassy Knoll continues.
Welcome to Beyond the Grassy Knoll. We have as our guest today Philip Gardiner, and in particular the reason why we had him on, because he's an author and he's a documentary filmmaker. But something came along my way that he did a documentary entitled Jules Verne, The Extraordinary Voyages. And it's about that I really wanted to get a chance to speak to him. And Philip, thanks a lot for coming on. After all the machinations, we finally got it going, huh?
Thank you very much for having me on.
You know, Philip, I cut you short on the bio if I did, but I mean, do you want to tell the folks, as you've not been on this show before, I'm sure some of them are very familiar with you, but how you came about to being in the position you are today?
Oh, I'll cut that one as short as possible. I'd probably version is I had one of those Damascus moments when I owned my own company, a marketing and print company, and I'd spent many years lecturing to people like government and Pepsi Cola and, you know, the big capitalist kind of world, and it really didn't fulfill me in the slightest, even though every week I was taking home buckets of cash. Didn't do anything for me, the cash. It might have made the wife happy, but it certainly didn't do anything for me. And because of the background that I had in marketing, you have to be a psychologist, really, to be in marketing. You have to know the mind of man. And one of those, that kind of tells you something. When you're doing these things, you know that you are bending people, you are manipulating them and using, you know, what people would call propaganda. And then on the other side of me, I had a real interest in history, and have done since I was, you know, a wee tot. So when I was reading history and reading things such as the Bible and you know, the Quran and various other things, I was seeing in there virtually what I was doing, which was an awful lot of manipulation and propaganda. And I thought, well, history can't necessarily be total truth, can it? So, you know, any historian, when he looks back, he'll look at, say, a Democrat paper and a Republican newspaper, and he won't take either of them as total truth, but the truth will be somewhere in between. So, you know, it's kind of, history is like that. You have to look back, you have to see what people are saying from what angle, and you know, you need to expand your mind to do that. So one day I just kind of said, I've had enough of all this, and I sold the company after I'd sat down and written a book as well. I sold the company and said, I'm going to take a big risk here, and I'm going to go out into the world, and in the things that I do, I'm going to try and make it a better place, and if you can, even if you just help one person, even if you're just a stone that's been thrown into a calm pond and cause a little ripple. That's what I'm trying to do. You know, I have a deep desire to help the innocents of the world, and that includes the animals, so I do a lot of work for animals too. So that's kind of what happened. It was a real Damascus moment. There's an awful lot more to it. You know, there's a military background and various other things, but it all built up to that one moment in time.
By the way, do you have any projects that are going on now that'll soon be released?
Oh, where would I start with that? Well, I've just started my own TV chat show in the UK called Gardiner's World, so that's going pretty well, and it's taking off quite a lot. We're getting a lot of celebrities who are wanting to come on as well and talk about their alternative beliefs. I've just come back from Norway, where I've made a documentary called The Viking Serpent, which was a fascinating time. We literally ran all over Norway, got so high I could hardly breathe on top of one mountain. It was fantastic time, so that's coming out soon. Just before that, I came back from Kentucky, where we made a Bigfoot film. I was the resident skeptic on that one, so it was a fascinating time in Kentucky, chasing around the woods at the middle of the night. I've also just finished a film on the Freemasons called Angels, Demons and Freemasons, which, unlike a lot of other films on them, actually uses their own texts. I got access to a lot of the very old texts from Spain and various other places, and we also managed to get a camera inside a lodge, so that was fun as well. And I've just finished a book called What Wise Men Do. So there's quite a lot more than that, but I won't bore you with all of it.
And the website where people can check out what's happening is gardinersworld.net.
.com.
That's right.
Gardinersworld.com, yeah.
All right. The old one, I think, was .net, and that'll do a redirect if people have some old information. But since you've heard him say it here, obviously that's the most recent site, is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a philipgardiner.net, but it redirects to it anyway. I mean, the simple website for people to go to be honest, I've just thought about it, is one called thebondcode.com. That's a nice, simple one to spell, and that's for a book that's just come out about Ian Fleming and James Bond. Which is rather current, seeing as the film's about to come out. So,
a little did we know, when we were all, in my case, youngsters, reading, basically going to the movies and then picking up a couple of books by Ian Fleming, not realizing that much of what he was telling us was the absolute truth, at least if not then, in the times to come.
Ian Fleming is a fascinating character, and much more fascinating than James Bond, in fact. So, if you want me to, I can give a little background on that.
I tell you what, since you offered it, I'll take a little bit, because, boy, had I known that, I'd ask for 2 hours. Go ahead.
We can go as long as you want. Well, Ian Fleming, fascinating guy. He came up in a very, very wealthy family. So wealthy, in fact, his grandfather owned a bank which was sold for several $1 billion. So this is a very wealthy family. He often saw royals, Churchill, and people like that in his own home. His elder brother was an international best-selling travel writer. His dad was a member of Parliament, but he died when Ian was only 8, and his mother was an overbearing lady. So he had an awful lot of work to do to equal his peers and to shine in his mother's eyes. And it appears that he failed miserably, and he was sent from one school to another, eventually ending up in Austria with a couple of psychoanalysts called the Four Denises. These were Adlerian psychoanalysts, and it was under the cover of he was there to learn languages, but he wasn't. It was to sort his mind out. And this was at the tender age of 19, so he was still very much like a sponge, accepting things, but developing his own mind at the same time. And they took him along to a lecture given by Carl Jung, the infamous psychoanalyst, who many in the esoteric world will know about. And he gave a lecture on Paracelsus, an alchemist and mystic and a healer. And it seriously influenced Ian Fleming so much that he actually got the guts up to go and ask Carl Jung himself if he could translate it into English, and he was given permission. Now, not many biographers, in fact none that I found, have actually really mentioned this or even followed it up. So I actually tracked the text down to a university in Texas, Houston University, and I got permission to use the text, and I've got copies of it in his own typing, in his own handwriting, where he scribbled things out, and it reveals an awful lot about the man. Now, I go through all that because Ian Fleming got into the occult, what people call the occult, the unseen world of Gnosticism and the esoteric world of alchemy. And he was influenced also by other writers around him, very famous writers, and he really wanted to create a book for himself that was profound, and yet came out with Casino Royale, which, a lot of people say it's just a spy novel. And in fact, if you actually look into that book, and you actually look into subsequent books, you find that he did in fact place his own knowledge of the occult in those books, and that they are the journey, very much like we're going to talk about with Jules Verne. It's fascinating stuff. You've got people in Casino Royale like Le Chiffre. It means cipher. And James Bond says to him, you are a very important cipher indeed. And it unlocks a code that's hidden within the James Bond novels that Ian Fleming put in there in such a clever and hidden way, because he was actually himself second in charge of of naval intelligence during the war and understood about codes. He actually put these things in codes so well that people have not seen it. And only the other day I was with a professor, an elderly gentleman, a professor of history, And I mentioned Ian Fleming to him, and he says, "Oh, I knew old Ian. Oh, he was deeply into the esoteric, that man, before I'd even said anything to this guy." So those that knew him knew that he was into these things, and the book really goes through all those elements of the people that he knew, and he even kept all the people that he knew in separate cells. He separated them. He didn't allow certain people to talk to other people for fear of revealing certain elements of his own mind, which he struggled with his whole life. He even said that Bond himself was a Manichaean, and Mani, of course, is one of the early Gnostics. So it's fascinating stuff. It really is. It opens up a whole new world for James Bond.
Yeah, that it does. Well, I tell you, you said something about Fleming's upbringing, which seems to have been the same case with Verne, and oftentimes seems to be the case with people who really have turned out to be prolific literarily or artistically or otherwise, and that is somewhat, can we say, of a oppressive or repressive childhood?
Oh, absolutely. You do find that the oppressive mother, in particular, can cause this. It did the same with Conan Doyle. It caused a real effect on him, and you'll find also very much similar with Houdini. So there is I can't remember the word. There is a psychoanalytical word that's used for it. It's a German word, but I can't remember what it is. But it is a real phenomenon that it can cause this energy within a person, almost as if till his dying day has got to prove something.
So, well, the other thing is I think might have combined to probably give him some kind of a sublimating activity, and that is, did this not take place at a time when he was living in a port town or near one?
Yeah, Jules Verne, yes.
Yes.
Yes, he was living in the port of Nantes, in the south of France, where he got a deep desire for navigation and all things seaborne, and he often dreamed of going out in boats. But the restricting family nature that he had, in this case, it was his father, not his mother. His mother, Sophie, was a very, by all accounts, a very nice woman, very gentle, and did support Jules Verne during a period that his religiously intolerant father, who actually beat his children and starved them, and is well known for having self-flagellated as well. While his own father had actually stopped funding him, giving him money to support him while he was learning law in Paris, his mother actually sent him food and various clothing items and money without his father knowing. So she was actually quite a nice girl. But his father, no, he's very oppressive, very religious, and was beating himself up something terrible for whatever reasons we don't really know. But yeah, so it caused a similar thing in Jules Verne, but from his father's side.
We're going to talk about, I think, a theme that runs through much literature for centuries, and that is the quest. But also there's something interesting, too, and that is the importance, I think, either in reality or in symbolism, that water or the river plays, or the seaport in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if I were, I guess I put myself in Verne's position, and if I could get to some place where I could get a release from where I lived and actually have something almost tangible I could dream on, if that isn't some kind of a contradiction statements, I'd go down to the water and wonder where that boat came from or what it would be like if I were on that boat going out. Yeah. Did you find anything of that sort in his early years?
He was definitely very fanciful about the sea and about water and about escaping from this land. He often spent hours at school listening to the tales of other children from around the world who were in his school. It was very famous and very popular and expensive school, so rich people from all over the French Empire, if you like, would send their people back to this place. So he would sit there and listen to tales of far-off islands and would dream about going there and also dream about going to the stars. Him and his brother were intrigued about one day that they'd be able to travel there. And, these are formative years, aren't they, for a young man? And if you've got a desire to write, as he did from a very early age, you're going to definitely put those concepts into your writing. And I think later on we found that deeply embedded with Captain Nemo.
Well, we can talk about the quest. It seems to be, let's face it, driven very, very much by males. It's a man thing, so I would say. And you cited in the documentary that there always seems to be two males together or a group of males, and this goes even into American culture, where there's always two males, whether it's Lone Ranger and Tonto, whatever it should be.
Yeah, Batman and Robin, yeah.
It's always that. And I mean, I'm not going to argue whether it's right or wrong, it just is, but I think it's probably cultural, because, who did all the journeying, really? It was the males that took it upon themselves. So, I mean, but the quest also for all human beings, whether they're male or females, is very important. Because it's a coming of age, I guess, a rite of passage, some kind of awakening. And this, of course, was central to what Verne wrote, was it not?
Oh, totally. What Verne was doing in his novels, not just his science fiction novels, but his other writings too, was placing in there the journey, this quest, which, as my good friend Tim Wallace-Murphy was saying yesterday, it's the quest for spiritual fulfillment. It's the quest to discover that true self within, which we know has the divine, and have done for an awful long time. The twins is a really important and interesting concept, because it's not a modern phenomenon. It's thousands of years old, so it's definitely an archetype within man, to use one of Jung's terms. It's an archetype, and I would go along with Jung and say that it is probably an expression of the dual nature of man, although we probably all have many natures. So, you find, even with people like the Knights Templar, they have the two riders on the horseback, and people have obfuscated for a long time over why that should be. And, in the Bible you have John and Jesus, and you have various other twins that are put together. It's very, very old, and I do think it is a very Gnostic expression of the duality.
We'll get back to the quest later on, but in this case also, what you tied together was the fact that Verne, I guess, now I never got this, I don't know how many adolescents got this when they read this, that there was something of esoteric knowledge involved, and expressly, are we talking what might be found in high-degree Freemasonry?
Oh, yes, definitely. As I just mentioned, Tim Wallace-Murphy yesterday, he's a top Freemason, and various other Freemasons have, since that documentary's come out, they've actually written to me or phoned me and said, how did you know this? You're not a Freemason. Well, you don't have to be a Freemason to find this stuff out. I've got an attic full of pre-19th and pre-20th century and 20th century Freemasonic texts and various things that I've collected from all over the place. So it's not something that's necessarily top secret. There are texts. What Verne is putting across in an awful lot of his books is the journey. The journeyman is a term that we apply to the Freemason. He is the man on the journey of spiritual fulfillment. It's a journey, we're told, across time that is continual. It's not something that you can stop. And it's not something that you'll come to the end of, if you know what I mean. It's not something before you die you'll go, eureka, I made it, I found it at last. I think it's a Navajo saying that says, don't trust the man who claims to be wise. So it's one that you'll never get there. You are on a continual learning journey, and you are continually growing and finding yourself in the whole that is the universe that we are part of. And Verne was expressing this. The question is, where did he get it from if he wasn't a Freemason and if he wasn't maybe a Rosicrucian? And he was getting it from all his friends and his peers who were all Freemasons and Rosicrucians. People like Alexander Dumas and various other writers, George Sand, they were Freemasons and they were big friends of his. One of his biggest friends, I forgot his name now. It's so late here, I forgot his name. But
the one I was going to ask you about was Edgar Allan Poe, or was it...
Edgar Allan Poe, the good old American Gnostic. No, his friend was Hignard. Sorry.
Okay, right.
It's just come back to me. His big friend was Hignard, and because he was so close to this man and went off on holidays with him all over the place, a lot of people have said that Verne and Hignard were homosexuals, with no evidence other than that these guys went off together. And yet, as you pointed out, this journey, whether real, literally, externally, or internally, and often the two unite, this journey of self-discovery is with another man. It is a brotherhood, it's a fraternity, and that's a very Freemasonic thing. Only because the Freemasons have picked up on these things over the course of their history. So he went off with Aristide Hignard, and Hignard himself was a top Freemason. Now, if Jules Verne did not pick up on this, if he did not, accept things that Hignard was saying to him, why did he, therefore, in his books, write about Freemasons, calling upon the Grand Architect and saying that the Freemasonic lodges were places of civilization, and various other characters being called, the Master and the Apprentice and various other things. He definitely included those elements, and he was also highly influenced, as you said, by Edgar Allan Poe, who was extremely popular at the time of Jules Verne, especially in France because he'd just been translated there. And Edgar Allan Poe he's called the American Gnostic. So he's influenced by these things, but also by the fact that Poe used codes in his own work to express this Gnosticism. There are good reasons for these things, and that is because one of the reasons is that words don't always express what we want them to do when we're saying it straightforward. To use symbolism is much more powerful. Analogy and metaphor is the only way you can do it in words. The Egyptians used hieroglyphs, but I'll just use a very, very quick instance. If you take an hieroglyph, which may give you the letter P, but the hieroglyph also means earth. And yet, so if you only read it as the letter P, you're only getting one level. But if you actually understand that they're saying earth as well, you're getting an extra level to that. But then the Egyptians also, you could read hieroglyphs forwards and backwards, and multiple levels. So that's good symbolism, which is very clever, uses a kind of code for only those with the eyes to see. And Verne was picking this up from, all the people around him. His influence with Edgar Allan Poe was paramount in that, I believe, but also the friends in Freemasonry, where their rituals and their texts and the various devices and tools that they had were all symbolic. They weren't necessarily using the compass and set square to build buildings. These things were symbolic. So Verne was a very extremely clever man. He wouldn't have passed his law degree if he hadn't been, and he was seriously into this stuff. So therefore it makes perfect sense that he would place those things in any works that he did.
Do you have any kind of evidence that there was any kind of correspondence between the two?
No, we didn't find any of that, I'm afraid. The problem with a lot of the Verne stuff...
Oh, that was burnt, wasn't it?
Jules Verne himself destroyed an awful lot of it, and then the moment he died, his wife did as she was instructed to do, and she'd burnt the rest of it. We have a notepad, and the rest is under lock and key, still with the Verne estate, and nobody's seen it for, since the guy died. So unfortunately, I've not found any from either the Verne estate or the Poe estate. So if it is out there, it would be fascinating to read.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on about what befell him, and kind of a rather unhappy ending, I would think. But again, we're with Philip Gardiner. He is the author of several books. I mean, maybe he'll pass on some titles to us right now. Also, he's a documentary filmmaker. He is hosting a television show over in the UK. What we're talking about right now is a documentary he did on DVD entitled The Extraordinary Voyages of Jules Verne. I left the of out the first time. I didn't see it on the DVD, sorry. But it's something that I found fascinating, and I'll tell you why for some other reasons if I could in a little bit, Philip. But also about the website and such, is there anything out there especially too that you would have folks take a look at, whether it's new or not? If I think you have a blog going there as well.
Oh, there's so many different things out there, and I don't do all of them myself anymore because, I'm working 18 hours a day at the moment just to keep ahead. I can't keep in touch with everything. But if people go to gardinersworld.com, that blows up into a lot of different places that they can go to. You mentioned some of the books. Gnosis was one of the books, which is about the Solomon's Temple. I recently had a book out called Gateways to the Other World, which is all about how our ancestors saw accessing the other world and the mystical experience. I had Secret Societies, a book out recently, and the latest, of course, is the Bond Code. So I've got about 100 radio shows booked for that, unfortunately.
Going back to the quest and what we've seen as far as Verne's works, most of the most famous ones, at least I guess the ones that we on in the States are probably most familiar with, all kind of dealt with some kind of quest. I think probably the two most famous ones would be Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something just before, if you want to address that. And that is, there seemed to me to be, in all his works, from what I remember, even though some were more uplifting, and excuse the pun, like Around the World in 80 Days, but there was something there that seemed a little bit bittersweet, a little melancholy. I don't know. I might be wrong about that. That's fine. But would you speak to that?
I would definitely agree with you 100%. What you actually find when you research Jules Verne is that he was a very somber gentleman, and his writings were actually very dark, and he didn't really do good endings, and he also was very political. Now, that might shock a few people because they can't read those things unless you go back to original manuscripts. And the reason is that Hetzel, his publisher, was actually the man who rewrote an awful lot of stuff. He took away the dark endings, and he took away the political slants. I believe that Hetzel was a Freemason himself. He had to get out of France during certain political upheavals there, because he was also very political. He did actually hold a government post at a particular time, and I don't think at that time you would have got a political post in France unless you'd been connected. So he was, what Jules Verne said himself, his spiritual father. And, you know, a kind of replacement for his own father. He was, I think, searching for a dad, a father, because his own father was something that not many of us would particularly have liked. He wasn't that loving character that we can all run to on Christmas morning. He's, a bit of an intolerant guy. So I think when Hetzel came along, a fatherly figure, Jules Verne jumped straight at it, and Hetzel influenced Jules Verne's writings incredibly so by amending the changes. And, you mentioned 20,000 Leagues Beneath the Sea. That was drastically changed by Hetzel. The character of Nemo is almost unnoticeable. And that's quite a big key and clue to the fact that Hetzel must have been involved in esoteric thought.
Obviously, Hetzel, perhaps because of his position in business as a publisher, or because he was what he was, aside from that, was dominant over Verne. And Verne, do you know if he allowed these changes to be made kicking and dragging, or did he pretty much submit?
In the early days, he kind of just submitted and shrugged his shoulders and let it carry on. But towards the end, 1889-ish, I think it was, he was really begrudging about the changes, and he argued a lot about that from the evidence that we've got. And, it's said by other people that the relationship between them got a little bit cold. But it didn't last long because Hetzel was soon dead. So then the writings of Verne started to turn more dark and somber, and we start to get a lot of gloom and doom, and the end of the world is nigh, and a lot of political statements. So, I think the evidence is there. It's kind of de facto. Hetzel goes, and all the doom and gloom comes back in.
Well, did Verne, despite what you chronicled in the DVD, and it had a lot to do with the other life, but in a sense, that's good. In the sense of that he believed there was something better waiting for him. But did he have, in a sense, at a certain point ever, a certain death wish? I mean, did melancholy ever overtake him to the point that he was just kind of waiting for the clock to run out?
You could read it that way. I know that a couple of biographers have read it that way, using some Freudian analysis that they did. Because Verne has stated things about death in a few of his novels. You know, he goes into depth. I mean, Nemo himself is dead, apparently, and dead is glorious, and these kinds of things. And so, using Freudian analysis, they've kind of said that, yes, that he was fixated upon death and probably his own death. And I think towards the very end, and the bitterness that crept in, he was certainly that way. I don't see personally any extra evidence for in his younger days. He seemed to enjoy himself an awful lot in Paris, around the brothels and the theatres and the clubs.
That'll do it.
You know, I think a man who's just not wanting to walk on this planet doesn't necessarily run around spending huge amounts of money doing the things that he was doing.
Okay. No argument here. What would you say, or do you know for a fact, was the most popular, or the most popular set of works that he's ever done? Just from on this side, if it means anything to you, Journey to the Center of the Earth has to be the all-timer to me. 20,000 Leagues also, and probably Around the World. Yeah.
Well, I think it was Around the World is probably the most financially successful. But it depends on what angle you're going to take. You know,
right.
if you start talking about, well, there's film rights to it, etc., which of course he didn't get a penny from. So, and he didn't really get an awful lot of money from his books, anyways, because Hetzel kept most of it for himself and paid Jules Verne a kind of retainer, right, or wage. But there's such a lot of other work that Verne did that just has not been translated into English, and so we're missing out on a lot of it. And his original manuscripts, that's what I would say. Can we please have the original manuscripts into English? Because although I can read French slowly, I would rather read the English. But very, very popular. Extraordinary Voyages as a group of books, a group of texts, were extremely popular and made lots of money, so much so that he went and bought a ship, and then updated that twice. So he didn't do too bad out of it. I don't think he was necessarily poor from it, but he could have made an awful lot more. For me personally, I prefer 20,000 Leagues because I love the character of Nemo. The fascinating character that, and it also reveals an awful lot about, you know, Verne's spiritual father, Hetzel.
Well, and the symbolism in there, and you made it apparent. Let's put it that way. But it's there to be found also, and it goes to this water image, which oftentimes has a rebirth motif in it, whether it's Christian oriented or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that was here as well, wasn't it, with Nemo?
Oh, the Nemo character and the whole 20,000 Leagues thing is just fascinating. Nemo says things that just are so esoteric. He is dead to the world above, to the material world, but alive beneath the oceans. And you would have to consider certain things. Firstly, that water, the sea, etc., and lakes have always been seen as the portal to the other world, to the place where we can't survive, because if you stick your head in there, you can't breathe. It's the place of the other world, and within there are a whole world of animals and creatures that you can see, but you can't actually exist with. And for man, for thousands of years, that has been a fascinating concept. And, you know, I'm of the opinion that the concept of Jesus walking upon water is a statement that man, or that concept of the Christ, is when you can walk between the worlds. And so Nemo, existing beneath the waves in this strange world, in a ship, the Nautilus, which Verne called the Ark, it's an incredible symbolic life that Nemo is leading, and his name, Nemo, means no one. So he is no one. What an incredible statement that is. But when we find out that he does have a name, Prince Dakar, and that itself is also clues along the way, because the Dakar is the tamarisk tree, and that is to the Hindus, and Dakar wasn't Indian. Nemo was an Indian; he wasn't a white man. We've got here the tamarisk tree, which is the tree of life, and so there is a lot of symbolism, a lot of code work in the names afoot. So Nemo, for me, fascinating, dark character, but also a side of our very selves.
And I'm just throwing this out to you only because I was dying to ask you after I saw the documentary, and that is with the Hindu slant with Nemo and Dakar. And, of course, with the water imagery also there, and the quest, I had to think of Siddhartha.
Arthur.
Anything?
You mean King Arthur?
No, Siddhartha.
Siddhartha, sorry, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, listen, the Yanks say things differently than you guys do.
Yes, sorry, Well, Siddhartha and Arthur, I think, King Arthur, they relate to entirely. But yes, absolutely, I would totally agree with that. There is a lot of evidence to show that Jules Verne was reading up on the Hindu texts just prior to writing that book.
And I'm only saying this kiddingly, but I had to laugh because my last venture in teaching was tutoring college freshmen, which is only slightly less worse, if I could say that, than teaching high school people. Because they're still intimidated they can get away with things. But they gave them some stuff to do in this kind of like pre-orientation class, and they laid some really heavy stuff on them, I thought, and one of them was Siddhartha, and I just said to them, look, it's simple. Here's how it goes. If there's water imagery, river, ocean, bay, whatever you got, it's important. Don't overlook it. Probably means rite of passage, and they were okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But, later on, you intimate, actually you say very overtly for what happened to Verne, that Verne may have given something away about the craft in the books that he wrote. And, again, at the time that I encountered them, that would have meant nothing to me. I never read anything of his as an adult. But, was there some kind of disturbance amongst those in the craft that he was telling something that he shouldn't?
Finding evidence for that, to be quite honest, would be nigh on impossible. There's so many texts at that time were just destroyed for one reason or another. Revolutions, counter-revolution, everything was going off in France at that time. So a lot of the evidence that we did have, and plus the fact that Verne destroyed his own records. But all we have is a set of occurrences and hints. So we have the occurrence that. Forgive me if I'm jumping the gun here, but we have the occurrence that his replacement son, Gaston, his favourite nephew, comes one morning and says, actually shoots his own uncle, shoots Jules Verne, and actually warns him about it beforehand. Now, what kind of assassin warns somebody that he's going to shoot them, and that the people that he has upset too many people, they still hold a grudge? So that's a clue. Why would you do that? We also find that instead of it being all over the press internationally for this world-famous guy, it hit the paper the next day and then disappeared. Never a word spoken. It was completely forbidden for that to appear in any newspapers, and we do have evidence of that. So we've got evidence that he was shot by his favourite nephew, who he, they both got on like a house on fire. So, and then we have the thing being covered up, and we have the intimation that it was because of something he'd done. We have his wife saying that a secret burned in his heart, and he couldn't say it. We have an early episode where he wrote texts which he said, these will never see the light of day. Nobody will ever see these magical invocations that he had written. We have him surrounded by Freemasons. We have a Hetzel, who I believe was a Freemason. If not, he certainly was highly influenced by them. And, Hetzel himself, most of his authors were Freemasons or Rosicrucians. We're in a period where Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry in France was, massive. Almost, you'd have been embarrassed not to have been one. So, it would appear something happened. Getting to the bottom of what that something was, something so bad that somebody needed to shoot him, I have no idea what that is, other than the record shows that in the books that he did write, we are talking about the journey. We can see before us almost ancient truths that we find in tales of King Arthur and, as you say, Siddhartha and alchemy itself. Was there something in these books that he let slip that he shouldn't have? I haven't necessarily found anything so damning, but I do know an awful lot of Freemasons. I'm not one, but I have lectured at Freemasonic lodges, and I class some of my best friends as Freemasons, that are Freemasons. I know from them that they pull back on things that they write. You know, I've got several friends who are internationally well-known authors, and I'm not going to name them, but they've written some books that have sold, multi-million copies, and they pull back. They are afraid to say certain things. One recently, I said to him, so what is the secret of this greatest symbol that you guys have, which is the dot in the centre of the circle? And both me and you probably know what the meaning of that is.
Yeah.
But he sat there and said, I can't tell you, old boy. It's the most secret, and we take an oath not to say. And, you question why, and they say, well, because it's not for the world of the profound. Profane.
Profane.
So we're all profane, and we're not allowed to know what a dot in the centre of a circle is all about.
But, one of the notes, we're all having a little slips there. One of the notes I made, and you talked about the dot in the circle, and I think I may have drawn that because you spoke about the perfect place.
Yeah.
And I always perceive that, boy, this is bad, I'm getting having an attack here, like Norm Cosby. I always perceive that as that's what that meant.
Yeah.
In fact, I have to tell you, it's interesting, on the original cover of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by Frank Baum, the O's in of, and what's the other one? Wonderful, ironically, have the dot in the middle. And I have to tell you, in deference to the UK and the crack I made before you came on air, on that cover, if you remember, by Denslow, the Tin Man and the Straw Man are very much in character like we remember that. But do you know that the lion is very much ornate, like a griffin?
Really?
And I always thought that was kind of a wink and a nod, because when I told you that we're still colonies, that might have been one of the levels of that book may have been the fact that it was something of a debate in the United States whether they were going to go monometalist or bimetalist. But with the lion there in that situation, it's like, don't worry about it, folks. The Bank of England runs the whole deal anyway, so it's okay.
It's strange, but my uncle is a professor of history, and he actually wrote a best-selling book all about the Wizard of Oz and how each of those characters were different nations, and basically exactly what you've just said.
Would you share sometime what that book's title is?
I can't remember at the moment. I'll email it you.
All right, dude, that'd be nice. I'd really like to check that out, because that's one book, by the way, we found about 4 allegorical levels for, whether bound men or not. Some of them obviously were intended. But I had to laugh at that cover, because it's like, that says it all, folks.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, though, to back to Verne. Also, there was something that really struck me as being very interesting, and I don't know if this is something that's in Masonic terminology or whatever, but it reminded me of the all-seeing eye or the cycloptic eye, and that was the second sight. That seemed to be a perfected sight. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. In Freemasonry, your straightforward Freemason that you'll meet in the lodge and have a drink with won't really know much about the second sight element of the lodge, but it is in there, and there is two kind of cutting lines through Freemasonry. There is the political side, or the straightforward literal side, where they just go through the motions, do the rituals, and shake each other's hands and make a lot of money and get themselves off of a parking fine. And then there's the other side, which is a very spiritual side, and they do have, and have for an awful long time, have the concepts of the second sight being something of profound importance. Now, I was with another professor of history last week, who was actually Grand Master of a another secret society, which I'm not going to name right now, but because I'm going in to film them. But he's actually doing research, and I know that there is some top secret level research going on in various laboratories about this second sight stuff, and about whether certain bloodlines within the world actually have psychic ability, and whether there is a genetic memory over and above the shape of our nose, whether people can remember their ancestors' actions. I have no idea about that. I have not found any evidence for it, and I know that it's highly debated, but that's just an indication of things that are still going on, and I know are funded by top-level Freemasons that are also funded also by other societies which are linked to them. That's fact. I know it because I've seen some of the work. So yes, it is something that's been of interest to these people for a long time, and today they are doing the old Rosicrucian thing and searching for it with science. Rosicrucianism stated itself, which is branch of Freemasonry, whether people like it or not, it came from them. Rosicrucianism was stated to use science to discover the divine in nature. And that's what these people were up to, and still are, very much today. Very, very, very rich people with high bloodlines in certain royal families. So there is some fascinating stuff still afoot, and I'm lucky to be in with some of these people to see firsthand what's happening.
Philip, I had to do a project for academia, I guess about 7 years ago, and I chose to do science fiction, and that's all I called them at that time, science fiction works, which as I took a look around, because all these works had to be necessarily around the middle of the 20th century, which would portend something for the 21st century. And what happened was, and this was a byproduct of what I was doing, if not even a try-product, was that I realized that a lot of what they had written wasn't necessarily fiction at all. It just hadn't happened yet. So with regard to that in Verne, and with the new term, I think, beyond what we know is science fiction, they also call it futurism. And I know you affix science fiction to an extent to Jules Verne, but would you call him a science fiction writer or a futuristic writer, or does it matter?
I would call him a futuristic writer rather than a science fiction writer, personally, because he himself argued with the new upstart known as H.G. Wells.
Oh, yeah.
He did not like the fact that H.G. Wells was not using science. He was just basically making things up that were really, really interesting. But that's not necessarily true, because I've just finished a work on H.G. Wells. So it's all in the book that's coming out next year. He said it himself. He's not a science fiction writer, and he uses science properly, whereas opposed to people like H.G. Wells just kind of make things up. So it's a debate. It's like I don't know. What is reality? It's one of those things that you can't really. Everybody's got their own opinion on it. It's fiction that he wrote with science, so it could be science fiction. There's that angle to it as well. But I would call him a futurist, because I think that he was also looking deeply at the future of the mind of man too.
This is a question you could probably take 5 hours answering, but I just got to at least get a yes or a no or something from you. When I take a look at how accurate many of these futuristic writers were, and I would take that right up to people like Philip K. Dick and Huxley. I'm not saying that. Well, here's what I'm wondering: if some of them were involved with an organization or a society where they very well knew the shape of things to come. Excuse that pun too.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a possibility that they all shared that kind of knowledge?
I can say from my own knowledge of the recent contacts that I've had that that's a fact. Because I'm a writer, okay? I could sit here now and write a fiction based on the things that I have seen in a laboratory being tested. Things that would blow people away. I know other people that are working on multi-billion-dollar starfighters does anybody know about these things? But I know about them, so I could work them into a fiction.
Right.
You know, there are many things that I've seen and so I could do so. But I know in that group that there are people that are fiction writers, and I know that they're writing them.
Yes.
That's fact. Yes. I've got first-hand knowledge.
Well, and you know, I'm not even saying that they were advocates of it or supporters of it. It's just that if they knew, they put it out in literature, and it certainly was successful and interesting. And then lo and behold, you find this comes about. So, like a lot of folks who listen to this show, we just say there's no fiction in science fiction.
That's right. Well, you know, at the end of the day, there's also the ego of man, isn't there? And if he sees something that he knows is going to be coming true soon, and he puts it into his fiction, and he will be heralded as a great futurist.
We're speaking with Philip Gardiner, and Philip, will you tell us again, especially because that's really interesting stuff. If it hasn't come out now, give people a heads up as to what's forthcoming.
You know, there's so many. Viking Serpent, I've just finished filming in Norway. That really is interesting. That is so fascinating because that involves the Gnostics and the battle between the Celtic Church and the Catholics. And it's an incredible story that you know, of murder and death and intrigue and placing strange markers upon the land. And I really enjoyed that because, you know, the whole film is like a race. It's get in the van, jump, scream across the nation. So that's really great. I really enjoyed that. And I've just finished a work called Archetype of the UFO, which is going to probably upset an awful lot of people that are into aliens, unless they can broaden their scope of their beliefs slightly. So that's good. That's interesting. I just finished that with a writer called O.H. Krill, and Nick Pope, who works for the MOD. Interesting guy. So I've just finished a couple of films with Tim Wallace-Murphy as well, and a celebrity here in the UK known as Johnny Ball, who wanted to express his disbelief on climate change.
Okay.
That's really alternative, to say the least. He's going to upset people.
Good deal. Also, the website is gardinersworld.com. All right. One thing I did find interesting with Verne's desire to portray the quest, he did it almost exclusively not upon the face of the Earth. He was below the surface, both, you know, inside the core and in the way under the waters, and also above the skies and around the moon. That bit of escapism, is that any kind of accident?
I don't think it's an accident at all. I think that he was actually stating that the Earth is an analogy or a metaphor for the material world that our soul needs to escape from. I think that's pretty evident in the things that he said. You know, he said from the material Earth to the celestial moon, and I think he meant it.
And also, I think it gives one also, the author that is, a chance to escape this reality, if you will, which, I mean, honestly, we all do that as we watch these works or read these works, and so why would not the author also be given to say, I want to, like, not necessarily shirk this mortal coil, but shake, you know, gravity and everything else?
Well, that would make so much sense with his childhood, wouldn't it? You know, he was a dreamer. He wanted to escape the shackles of his father's abuse when he was in Nantes, and he wanted to get on that boat and disappear. And he would stare up at the sky and see the stars and wish he were up there. So it makes total sense that he carried that forward into his adulthood.
Also, I have to say, and I don't know if you came upon this as well, but for whatever reason, I think Disney Studios must have gotten really enamored of his works, because they put out, I think, a bunch of these in the 60s, and I thought did a pretty good job, at least, you know, optically, if you will, or visually.
Yeah.
And I tell you, somebody sent me a film the other day from something that was found in some caves. I can't describe what it looked like, but I can only say, and Disney's an interesting guy too. Let's face it, right? Yeah. What Disney shot in The Journey to the Center of the Earth, what it looked like these crystals coming down, not stalactites or stalagmites, but these crystal. I can't even describe them. When I saw what was sent, and this is from National Geographic, I said to myself, they weren't even guessing on this one. They knew it. I just thought it was spectacular. But anyway, be that as it may, going, if we can, to the end, well, not the end, but I guess around 1886, when Verne is shot by Gaston, you mentioned this to a certain extent. It almost seemed like what we would call today as a Manchurian candidate.
Yes, you mean the fact that Gaston was probably chosen to do this.
And let me just get this straight, unless I misinterpreted this. The statements that he made, that somebody wants to kill, or someone's pursuing you, was that made prior to his shooting him?
Yes.
Well, I mean, actually, as he was holding the pistol.
That is the tradition, and that was written up at the time, that's what was said. And that's as much as we know. So, we don't have the actual Gaston because he was whisked away to an insane asylum for the rest of his life. But so we have the murmurings of the people around it from diaries and various other things.
So could it be that if Jules Verne did not give away secrets of the craft in his work, at least on an overt level, that it was understood by even people like myself, right? Excuse me. And that if his works were destroyed on his wish, could it be that he had amassed too much information, perhaps, or was going to do something later, perhaps?
When you're a Freemason and you die, you have to, or a Rosicrucian, you have to make sure that all your diaries and all your texts are destroyed. You have to make sure that your tools of the craft are passed on. I was at a funeral recently of a Freemason, and the family were absolutely upset because two Freemasons actually came to the funeral and asked where his briefcase was and took it away because he didn't have time to hand it in or to pass on to others that he needed to get rid of it. So it's still paramount today that there are things that they do not wish us to see or know about. Pretty sad, really, because I've got most of the stuff in my attic and it's not really that deep, but it's, there is psychological depth to this, there is a spiritual journey, but maybe on a darker side there is also an awful lot of empire building afoot, which you have to be careful about people knowing.
Okay, I won't make more of what happened with Gaston, although that's not necessarily a story we haven't seen repeated. Or I wouldn't even say a story, I mean an actual account that we haven't seen repeated. And real quickly, I mean, I'll even flash back to, 1981, when Reagan, maybe 60 days into the presidency, was shot by a very John Hinckley, who was the son of the backers of Father Bush, of the Hinckleys of Colorado. In other words, what I'm saying is all of a sudden this guy comes on and does this, and you find out he's related, and he's an assassin, and it just isn't making any sense. And just like you said, what happened with Gaston, that account just went away in the newspapers, and thus it did here also in the United States with, there's no conspiracy, there's no assassination plot, and life goes on.
Yeah, they tend to dumb us down with various things. I mean, Nick Pope, I mentioned earlier, the MOD guy, just as an aside here, as if this was Freemasonry, the government used to say things like, there are no little green men. It would dumb people down. It would make people appear foolish. And those things are still done as well. And they're done by the Freemasons and various others. So, conspiracy theorists will always say these things, etc. Just calling people conspiracy theorists now is, it's a terrible thing to be.
Oh, yeah.
So, but doesn't mean that there wasn't a conspiracy. Everybody conspires. It doesn't matter who they are, whether they're a school teacher or an author. They all conspire to do something at the end of the day. It's just that the more powerful people that are together conspiring can be more worrying when there's no when it's not open and in the public domain. We're the people that voted these people in. They should therefore be open and honest to us, supposedly.
Philip, I got to believe that with all you've done in your research and where you're going to go, you can't tell me that the world doesn't run by conspiracy.
I think it's a fact. But I don't personally see a man sat stroking a white cat at the head of it all.
No, but that's true. That's true.
Just lots of them all over the place.
All right, two things real quick. One question is, I don't know, you've never said it. You'll tell us now, one way or the other. Do we know what if Verne was in Scottish Rite or York?
We've no idea, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. And lastly, and I want to end on this because this is I don't know, this is weird. When they erected a statue to Verne, all right, you know where, all right, you know,
Yeah.
and the windstorm blows up and a tree falls and just takes his head off.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to just ask you one thing. In the masonry lore, I think we can establish that if you're going to kill a head of state, and I mean I'm not even going to talk about Kennedy, all right, but if you kill a head of state, it's usually a head wound.
That's right.
All right. Now, what do you do with something like the tree?
Well, you know that we were actually talking earlier, symbolism is a very powerful thing, because not everybody can read it, and it has many multiple levels. The fact that Verne's head was struck off in a storm, so we're told, but it was left there on the ground for a year. You know, this is a cycle it's been left there for.
All right, so even that in itself, the time that they would not touch it.
Yeah.
You cannot make this stuff up.
No, it's fascinating, isn't it?
And just
the beauty is that there's so many authors like this that were involved, you know, especially from that time. H.G. Wells is another guy. Fascinating.
Boy, like I said, you promised, you said I could go over, and I really don't want to belabor this, but you know, I have to tell you, there are a number of works that came out around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. And I'm not. This is not about bad guys, honestly, Philip. But a lot of this came out of the city of London and London, and they were very, very precise and accurate in what was foretold. Even a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called Lord of the World by Robert U. Benson.
Yep.
Help me out here.
Yes. Well, it's a long time since I've read that, but I remember thinking at the time, you know, this was an extremely clever gentleman.
Well, even Alfred Mackinder, who to me was a he might have been the first geopolitician, who said, and I'm watching what's happening in the Mideast today, and I don't believe it's at all, as far as the United States is concerned, about oil or terrorism.
No.
But I see Mackinder and Benson said the same thing. It's going to come down to a Eurasian war, and whoever. You know, Brzezinski said it recently, whoever has the heartland's got a good chance of running the table.
That's right, absolutely.
And
they're still at it. They've been at it for a long time. I mean, you know, I wouldn't want to put a precise point on it, but I think it's over 1,000 years.
But what a great body of work came out at that time.
Yeah.
Right about the end of Verne's lifetime, but then, of course, like you said, Wells and others sprang up and continued it. So, listen, thank you very much for being with us. We're with Philip Gardiner. Again, the website is gardinersworld.com. We've only been talking about the extraordinary voyages of Jules Verne. Well, that's a lie. We kind of talked about Ian Fleming, too, and some of the other works that he's involved with now. If there's ever a time when it's peaceful around your house, so I'd like to have you on, especially to talk about Ian Fleming. That's really great stuff. And, you know, and on your way out, you got to tell me that the work you're doing now, that it's profitable is a good thing, but you must love it.
Oh, man, this is the most enjoyable thing I've ever found to do. I've rarely stayed in a job longer than 2 years, but this is so much fun.
Well, you know, who can ever deny anybody that kind of happiness? And the fact that it might actually pay the bills is excellent. All right, so listen, thank you for being with us after all this time. I appreciate it. I hope you thought it was worthwhile. I hope we get a chance to talk again.